So this really is looking like a constitutional crisis in which Texas has built this border wire fence. The feds don't want it up there and have been interfering with it to the point where Texas had to go into court to say, please stop them from interfering with our efforts to protect ourselves. And they won at the lower court level. They won at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which issued an injunction against the feds saying, do not cut down their wire fence. And then the Supreme Court lifted the injunction, basically clearing the way for the feds to cut down the border fence. They haven't yet gone back to do it, but they might. And Texas right now is saying, we're going to build more wire fencing. And Governor Abbott, he didn't actually do it yet, but he did say, I will continue to prevent the Biden administration from destroying our property. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty close to saying, I'm not going to listen to the fact that the injunction was lifted by the high court, and the high court basically gave them a temporary green light to go in there, the feds. So what do you make of all of it?
Well, first, this is a classic constitutional clash under the concept of federalism and the supremacy clause. You have a very legitimate state interest here, very legitimate, in preventing the crossing over of illegal immigrants with fentanyl and crime, et cetera. And you have a legitimate federal interest in controlling the national borders of the United States. So it's not surprising that you get an unsigned 5-4 decision with a moderate and a conservative joining the three liberals. Let's remember, this is a temporary order. This is an order only pending final resolution of the case after evidence is taken. We'll see how many emergencies there have been. Remember, the lower court also made exceptions and said the feds could come in and cut the wires in the case of a medical emergency. But the feds came back and said, no, it takes too long. In case of a medical emergency, it'll take 15 minutes to cut the wires. And by that time, it might be too late. So this is a very important case that I think we're just seeing the beginning of. And it may very well be that one of the two conservative moderates is just waiting and saying, let's hear the evidence. It wouldn't surprise me if Barrett ultimately joined the state of Texas after the decision was made on the merits rather than just as a preliminary matter. So it's not.
Or maybe Chief Justice Roberts, because sometimes when he votes with the liberals, he does so in order to prevent chaos, maintain the court's integrity. He certainly would want to avoid a constitutional crisis. And in this case, voting with the liberals is helping create one. So there's a shot at him too, I think. What do you think?
I think that's right. There's no way of avoiding a constitutional crisis here. It's inevitable. Texas has a strong point of view. If you had a vote in Texas, it would be, 80-20 in favor of what Texas did. And you have already at least one congressman advocating civil disobedience, saying essentially what Andrew Jackson said to the Supreme Court in one of the Native American cases, you've made your decision, now enforce it. Of course, times have changed and the federal government can enforce its decisions and would enforce it if it came to it. But there's no way of avoiding a constitutional crisis here unless Congress gets involved and starts passing some reasonable legislation, allowing control of the border, dividing the function appropriately between the state and the federal government, which is where it belongs. But this has become so politicized. This is going to be a major issue in the 2024 presidential election. The Republicans know that border control is a great issue for them. The vast majority of Americans, even in the North, believe that the borders are too open and that the Biden administration is responsible for that. So this will figure heavily in the election. Already we're seeing the Democrats moving slightly in the direction of more.
All right, but wait. Let me stick with you on the legal analysis. The Fifth Circuit decision, which the Supreme Court in that 5-4 decision, which was just a paragraph long, reversed. But the Fifth Circuit decision said defendants are enjoined during the pendency of this appeal, and the plaintiff was the state of Texas. The defendants are the feds. So the feds are enjoined, meaning stopped, during the pendency of this appeal from damaging, destroying, or otherwise interfering with Texas's sea wire fence in the vicinity of Eagle Pass, Texas.
Right.
So they're saying that the feds may not destroy or damage that fence. The Supreme Court lifted the injunction. So does that mean, so the feds can go in there, they absolutely can go in there now and try to cut down the fence. Does the lifting of the injunction against the feds from doing something stop Texas from doing something like fighting the destruction of that fence?
Well, under the Supremacy Clause, the state of Texas must abide by the Supreme Court's decision. Now, as you say, the Supreme Court's decision merely lifts an injunction. And so it does give Texas some ability to achieve the results it wants to achieve, but it can't do it in direct defiance of the Supreme Court. It would have to figure out clever ways of
well, let me ask you about
this.
that. So I have a thought on it. So the way I would read it is, so Texas can't stop the feds from cutting down the fence, if I'm right, if I'm reading this right, but
That's
they
right.
can put up a fence the next day. They can put up another fence and another fence and another fence.
And especially if they don't put a dangerous fence up, a fence that has razor wires that can cut people and that can endanger.
Well, why couldn't they? They have that up now. That's what was at issue here. And so why can't, and it's been very effective. And actually the decision, the Fifth Circuit decision, talks about how, let me just read you part of it. To guard the vast stretches of land between these points of entry, Congress created the Border Patrol, whose objective is to deter illegal entry into the U.S. In recent years, illegal crossings have increased dramatically, talking about how it was 458,000 in 2020, 1.7 million in 21, 2.4 million in 2022. Unsurprisingly, the situation has been exploited by the drug cartels, who have made an incredibly lucrative enterprise out of trafficking human beings and illegal drugs like fentanyl, which is frequently encountered in vast quantities at the border. But they go on to say that the two parties have been working together quite well. Texas has constructed along more than 29 miles of municipal and private land in the Eagle Pass sector of our southern border. And they talk about how the feds and Texas have been working quite well together for some time. The Border Patrol wants to enforce the border. It's the corporate bettors in D.C. who are telling them that they're constrained. So I just, what came up was the wire fencing and whether it was hurting people, like illegals who were trying to get in. They alleged that people had been caught in it, people had been hurt, people allegedly drowned. And according to the press, that caused even the Border Patrol to say, we can't have this, and we're actually in charge of the ones processing these illegals, so it's got to come down.
This is an obvious answer to the problem. You're very sensible. I wish you were the president or in charge of the Border Control, because you and I together can come up with an obvious answer in which Texas and the federal government work together on the legitimate goals, but the provocative nature of razor wires and 3 people allegedly drowning and medical necessities is what caused the provocation. This is a case that never should have come to the Supreme Court. It should have been resolved by adult, wise minds working together to achieve Texas's legitimate goals, while at the same time not defying federal court orders. I suspect that's the direction in which it's going to go, and I suspect that in the end there will be a resolution, and it will require building more barriers, but not ones as provocative as razor wires. Probably help.
Because it is risky. It's risky. I hate to see Texas get in the position, if it chooses to, of defying the Supreme Court order. Although I can see the argument, how do you defy the lifting of an injunction against someone else? It's like, you know, the feds were enjoined from doing something. Now they're not enjoined from doing something. Texas can just keep doing what it's been doing, which is the fence is going back up. The fence is going back up again. It's going back up again. But if they try to stop the feds from pulling down the fence, now we're on shakier ground. Let me ask you this, though, as a constitutional guy, something new enters the fold today. Abbott puts out a statement saying, well, it was yesterday, saying, the framers included Article 4, Section 4, which promises that the feds shall protect each state against invasion. And Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, which acknowledges the state's sovereign interest in protecting their borders. And he says the failure of the Biden administration to fulfill its duties imposed by Article 4, Section 4, meaning protect the states against invasion, has triggered Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, meaning the states have a sovereign interest in protecting their borders, which reserves to this state the right of self-defense. For these reasons, I have already declared an invasion under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 to invoke constitutional authority in Texas to defend and protect itself. That authority is the supreme law of the land and supersedes any federal statutes to the contrary. So he's invoking the U.S. Constitution to say he's got ultimate authority on what happens at the border, no matter the federal statutes that say this is the purview of the federal government.
It sounds like something Ted Cruz would have come up with in my class when I taught him.
Ted Cruz is arguing the same, I think, right now. Keep going, sorry.
Right. Brilliant constitutional theorist. And I think the argument is a sound one. That there's no firm answer in the Constitution. The Constitution didn't anticipate a situation like this. But I think what Senator Abbott is doing is showing that there is a constitutional argument on the other side. He will make that argument through his lawyers in the case itself, which has still not been resolved. And we may see a different constitutional issue presented to the Supreme Court 6 months or a year from now. All we know, and you put your finger on it exactly, is that what the federal government today what the state government cannot do, and what the federal government can do, but it's very limited. It's limited both in time and both in scope. And so we're going to see this continuing.
The pressure to conform to political correctness has undeniably suppressed genuine debate, and it's time we put a stop to it. Enter Freedom 2.0. I love this. Listen to this. It's a bottled water company, an unapologetic one that proudly supports the freedom to speak, to think, and to listen. We can't afford to remain silent anymore. It's crucial to make our support for the First Amendment crystal clear. And one impactful way to do so is by choosing products from companies that share our values. Visit freedom20.com and use the code MK for a 15% discount when you get there, to stand with me and millions of other Americans in celebrating the right to free speech. Remember, freedom is not inherited. It's something we must actively fight for. So raise your voice, grab your bottle of Freedom 2.0 and make a statement. Cheers to Freedom 2.0. That's Freedom 2.0, like the letter O, not Freedom 2.0 when you're typing it in. And champion the power of free speech. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.